fantastic panel today, but I think before we go there, we want to make it as interactive as possible. So you've got the Slido details. So we would like to hear from you in terms of what you think are the most pressing challenge today that is facing the younger population across the world, particularly in the global south. So if you can go to the Slido details, if you don't, can we have this on the screen again? We can. And yeah, in the next 5 minutes, if you can do that, we can basically see the results. So let me first introduce the panel. We have a interesting combination of experience and insights and in the panel today. So first, Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, who requires no sort of introduction in Bangladesh, at least. He's a macroeconomist and a very well-known public policy analyst, and currently a distinguished fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD. He's a former ambassador and a permanent representative of Bangladesh to the World Trade Organization and UN offices of Geneva and Vienna, and special advisor on LDCs to the Secretary General of UNCTAD. He sits in many international expert groups, governing bodies of a number of leading institutions, and editorial boards of reputed journals. But in the last few years, he has been a pivotal figure in Bangladesh to bring in more young people into the SDG discussion, and also lead in terms of the Global South's response in SDG, tackling the SDG challenges. So we will hear from him in terms of the macro perspective. So as a first speaker, we also have Sohara Mehroze Shachi, who's the research associate, inclusive budgeting and financing for climate resilience in UNDP, but that's just her day job. But she does a lot of other things. She is part of the Global Shapers community, which is basically a youth network for World Economic Forum, a network of exceptional youth committed to improving the state of the world. She's a graduate of Yale University and also working as an ambassador in enhancing Bangladesh's access to climate finance. She also works as a freelance journalist, shedding light on the multifaceted impacts of climate change, and because of her work, she was awarded a Thomson Reuters Fellowship, scholarships to attend international climate conferences, UN General Assembly, Global Climate Action Summit, and also won the 2016 Asian Young Environmental Journalist of the Award. Then we have Labib Tazwar Rahman, who's a founder of InclusionX. Labib is probably the youngest CEO here, and the ripe age of 20. He heads InclusionX, which aims to integrate people with disabilities into the society with inclusively designed programs in arts, awareness, and computer science. Based in Bangladesh, Labib is looking towards building a network of organizations that cater to the community of people with disability in the country in any field ranging from accessibility to policy. He's a second-year undergraduate student at Stanford University in the US, also works as a dark matter researcher at SLSE National Laboratory. Moreover, he co-founded a human-machine interaction-based haptics company called Newbility in South Korea, which has partners like Hyundai Motors. We have Sebastian Groh, who's the managing director of SOLshare. Sebastian is currently the managing director of SOLshare in Bangladesh. He's a 2013 Stanford Ignite Fellow from Stanford Graduate School of Business and holds a PhD from Aalborg University, where he wrote his thesis on the role of energy in development processes, energy poverty, and technical innovations with a focus on Bangladesh. On behalf of SOLshare, he received numerous awards, among them the InterSolar Award for Outstanding Solar Businesses, the UN Momentum for Change Award, both in 2016, and the 2017 Startup Energy Transition Award by the German Energy Agency. And Dr. Groh became Ashoka Fellow in 2018 and a UBS Global Visionary in 2019. He's also working as an assistant professor at North-South University. A round of applause for our great panel here, please. Thank you. And so let's kickstart the conversation with the Global Sustainable Development Goals. I would request Dr. Debapriya to give us some perspective, as basically we are talking about reframing the development dialogue around young people. I think he's going to do a presentation on this, and let's hear from him. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I don't hear the response. Good morning, everybody. That's much better. That's much better. Colleagues and friends, I'm definitely pleased to be here today. And as I came in, I was hearing Dr. Musa. He gave a fantastic overview of issues, how this platform is going to contribute in terms of learning, networking, and innovations and taking things forward. That was very, very enlightening. I really appreciated that. I do appreciate this invitation to be here today. I'd like to thank Asif, Saleh, and all the team of this Social Innovation Lab. I almost said Frugal Lab, but it's okay. For bringing me out over here. And it's definitely a refreshing experience when Asif Saleh says that we have a panel which is a combination of experience and expertise. He essentially meant old and young people. So he has started off with the old person. And the issue which I want to discuss with you is not about youth, but about age in certain ways. You'll have to bear with me on that. The perspective what I bring today over here is that, to start, what is a youth? Now, I'm a person who believes in Picasso quite a lot. Picasso said, youth has no age. How many of you agree with that? Please raise your hand. You're not sure, huh? Some of the younger people are not very sure. And the issue is, at the end of the day, youth is what you feel, what is inside. So that's what is important over here, to bring out what's inside, irrespective of your age. But having said that, as an economist, I have a problem over here. Because at the end of the day, we have to define demographic categories and try to understand which age group falls under the youth, starting from our voting rights to all other national, the privileges we want to exercise. Now, here I give you a rundown of how the youth is defined in various parts of the world. Have a look. The minimum age, regarding the minimum age, we have a consensus. It's 15. But as you will note, that there is no consensus on the upper limits of it. Upper limits varies from 24 to 35, and that is the limit which goes on. And if you take a country like Bangladesh, even in that country, we have two age definitions even for the youth people. If you go to the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, which essentially estimates how many young people are there in the labor force, they will use the age limit of 29. But if you look at the National Youth Policy, so it will take you to 35. I would have loved to take it to 60, but anyway. But the issue is that even within countries, there are no consensus or adequate, harmony regarding defining who is a young person. The answer for a policymaker is it depends. If you're looking at labor force, this is one thing. If you're looking at voting rights, it's another thing. If you're looking about social privileges, social welfare, it's another thing. For unemployment benefit, then it's another thing. And then you have overall contribution in the society, entrepreneurship, and many other things. So we have a conundrum over here. So the issue is, how many of you really agree on a lower limit, and how many of you agree on an upper limit? Please raise your hand who wants it to be 35. hesitant. Younger people really do not want the older people to get into the group. I can see that over there. But you see what is happening. Why the upper limit is important and why the upper limit is moving. Because the average longevity at birth is increasing. As the people are living longer lives, so obviously the relative term of youth has also become much more flexible and going upper. Do you know what is the average longevity in Bangladesh now at birth? Any idea? 72, close to 72. Do you know what is the average age globally at birth? Please, please, come. Around 70, 70.1. Just imagine how many people would believe in the world that Bangladesh has an average longevity at birth higher than the global average. How many of you would have believed it? Huh? And this is all because of frugal innovations done by the government, but no less by the non-government organization, including BRAC. That is also, this is because of the child immunization and many other things. But that's for Dr. Musa and Asif to say. I take pride in that because Asif, while introducing me, mentioned I sit in various boards and editorial boards and others, but he conspicuously forgot that I sit in the BRAC International Board. Now, I don't know, that was good or bad. Now, let's move on. So, this youth population, if you see, we are around 8 billion people in the world, 7.6, 7. So, and the youth population, if you go by the United Nations definition up to 29, so it is about 16% of the global population is youth population. Every 6th person in the world is now a young person below 30. That is and above 15. So that group we are talking about. Now, how this is distributed? Look at this. What color is this? I'm colorblind. Is this crimson? It's orange. Okay. So the orange color is Asia. 60% of the young people are living in Asia. Obviously, with India and China over there, it's no wonder. The second largest, they are in Africa, 20. And if you go to Europe, it is 7%, and you come to North America, it's 4%. So you are sitting at the hotbed of youth population at this very moment, with India and China on two sides, Bangladesh in between. So you have a look at this. Now, how this composition is changing in the world, you'll have to follow that one. The composition of is changing in the world that within this African population or the Asian population of 60%, only 16% are young people going below 30. In Latin America, it is 17, and in Africa, it's 19. Now, this is the catch. The demographic transition which is happening globally is that in Asia, the youth population is going down because of lower fertility, the population planning, and also because already there is the demographic momentum dividend has come to stay. It's a stabilization of the population. Whereas in Africa, you see in Africa, the youth population is going to increase rapidly. So in the future, you will see decrease in the 60% and increase in that. What was the African share? How many of you remember the African share? Okay, so it's going to go in the double digit soon in certain ways. So this is the compositional change we are having. And obviously in Europe and in Asia, if you take in the North Asia, if you take the Eastern Asia, like Korea, Japan, obviously there are aging population over there. So the world is going through a demographic transition, whereas this youth population is growing in different parts in a different rate, and it is stabilizing at a level. So what are the major issues for the youth, what we see from the literature? And that will take me to the SDGs, whether the SDGs really reflect adequately the issue of youth problem. So the first and foremost issue is the unemployment issue. If you go anywhere amongst a youth gathering, and I do that quite often from grassroots to global, what do you call it? From local to global. And so you become, what is it? Glocal. So in a global discourse, you will find there is a consensus. Number one issue is unemployment. And if the unemployment issue has become much more important with the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, and what we are seeing that the youth labor force is shrinking, the youth population is shrinking in the labor force. Many people really do not really fully appreciate that particular dimension, that in general the share of the labor force is decreasing. Youth labor force participation rate, and if you see, look at it, that it is still remains highest in sub-Saharan Africa. So it is, do you see the paradox here? The relatively underdeveloped region of the world is hosting greater share of youth in the labor force than the relatively more developed part of it, say, for example, Southern Asia, or for that matter, Latin America and Caribbean on that. So there is an issue to be explained why the youth population in the labor force is so much varied across region when we have seen distinctive trend in terms of youth population growth by region. So there is a socio-economic issue to be addressed over here. What Musafai was mentioning, beyond the technical solution, you'll have to find the social and political issues over here. That is something over there. The second one is NEET means not employed or in training. So we take those who are not employed or in training, what is that share of the population? That share of the population is also increasing. That younger people who are not in school, not in college, not in university, not in a training center, but out there in the market, but also not employed. So that share is increasing, and that share is increasing, you will see that it is also higher in case of women. There is a gender divide over here that women are definitely much more discriminated against. Incidentally, 5 minutes I understand, but the SDGs are supposed to be up to 2015. So you know that 15 years. Let me move on. The second problem is, of course, youth and education. The educated youth are not getting enough employment. That is the other part of the thing. That whether it is a supply side problem or a demand side problem, that's another debate. Reproductive health of young women has figured very prominently in the youth discourse. And starting from early marriage, and you will see the second one which goes along with the reproductive health issue is the adolescent childbirth. The women at adolescence age giving childbirth, and child marriage still remains highly prevalent, and that is a fourth biggest, largest issue which has come up in any global debate if you want to go. Fifth issue, which has a bit of a regional variation, the HIV infection amongst the young, first time HIV infection among the young people. That's one. And the most recent issue which is being discussed nowadays is the youth population within the refugees, starting with not only Rohingyas, but globally from Palestinians and many others across Africa. This issue is also coming out very strongly. This is the newest addition in our youth debate. So how do you really deal with them, and what are the issues? And the discussion in Bangladesh regarding youth problem, this is a catalog of issues which have come up from our various discussions. On top of it is employment, and those who are aware in Bangladesh, coming from Bangladesh, they should be aware about the quota reform movement in public service. The second one has come out with the education. The quality of the education is the prime concern, because people are getting certificates, but they are not being recognized by the markets in terms of employment. So, and then there was a taxation issue in the education system. Then the health and well-being, the road safety movement which has happened in the recent past. Drug addiction among the youth has very prominently figured in all our focus group discussions and conferences and any other discourse like this one. Fifth is the digital security, the cyberspace. This is another open area where people are really moving around, the younger people are moving around, and how do you protect them from various kinds of things? But by protecting them, you do not deprive them from access to information and many other issues. How do you do that balance? And last but not the least, youth and militancy, extremism. That this issue has also figured across the world in many ways. If I go back at the end, you see in a global debate, what is being said this is the UN Global Dialogue, which brings out the major issues which was discussed over there. That they're for tomorrow, not tomorrow, as Musabai was also mentioning, they are here today, focus on opportunities and et cetera, et cetera. But look, the discussion on extremism, which figures nowadays very strongly, they are telling don't link violent extremism with poverty or religion. That you cannot explain this violent extremism, the rise of extremisms among the young people only through poverty and definitely not attributed to religion. So that is a new debate which is also coming in many ways. Now let me see my last couple of slides on. This pointer is not young enough. Now, you all remember that 4 years back we had the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the United Nations. All countries, 193 countries and states signed up to it. And it has 17 goals, 169 targets, 222 indicators. So out of this, how many really, if this is the new vision of the world, this is the new global consensus of development paradigm, how much they are youth sensitive? That is a question I put before you. Now, if you look in the SDGs, you will find 3 goals directly mentions youth. 3 goals. Education, and it is about quality education. The second one is decent work and economic growth. And the third one is climate action. These 3 goals very specifically targets the youth. Look at the targets what it's talking about. This is the participation rate of adults. I'm talking about, their goals and then their targets and then their indicators. So within the indicators, if you see, the proportionate rate of adults in formal and non-formal education. So the rate of, it's not literacy issue, it's about about enrollment, which is very important over here. Then you will see, within the education quality, ICT education had been singled out very specifically, that ICT education's participation is important. If you look at the decent work, that this is about the NEET, not in employment or in training. That percentage is a monitorable indicator for the future, that for the young people, whether they are getting employed or not. So that's very important. And obviously, it has the other parts. On the climate action, it is about capacity buildings among the youth in order to be climate resilient and others. But there are other goals within the 17 goals which are implicitly targeting the youth, not mentioning in the goal, not mentioning in the target, but mentioning in the indicators. So where you get the age group. So on health, you see, on health issue, on gender equality, on decent work, and also peace, justice, and strong institution. So if you'll go through them, what you will see that on the implicitly target goals, it is the gender issue which has been prevalent, gender perspective. And one particular issue which is very dominant amongst these indicators is violence against women. Violence against women is something which the world is now taking very seriously. And it is not about violence against women only at the workplace. It is also starting from spousal violence to going down to the social space within which things are happening. So if I can go through each of them separately, but I wanted to highlight, bring to your attention 1 or 2 issues over there. And let me come, these are on the, I can go to them later if you want to, because they are more in details. So we recently had an election, recently there was election manifestos brought out, So election manifestos, really, we analyzed the election manifestos because we had been campaigning quite a lot from our citizens platform. We have a citizens platform which has more than 100 organizations for promoting implementation of SDGs in the country in an inclusive way. That is and the major tagline is, of course, leave no one behind. I wish I had the film to show you leave no one behind, but you can log into our website and see that. So there's the discussion, what we took out a declaration for the youth and which we promoted amongst the various political parties and expected that they will reflect them in their election manifestos. And let us take some credit. The political parties in Bangladesh in the recent past, last year, at the end of the year in December, did show more sensitivity towards the youth issue, which was not an agenda earlier. So if people say that advocacy like this, platforms like this, declaration like ours do not work, I don't believe it. We have seen some results that they have, at least in terms of rhetorics or political polemics, they have put it into their document. So if they have put in, what are the issues which were there? Incidentally, they have related youth issues to the SDGs. So then the quality of education, support for innovation, employment according to merit. That's a very dubious formulation, of course. Then education and employment opportunities for women. Women among the youth have been singled out. That's a good part. And for skill development and other issues over there. So we see that there had been some set of common issues over there. And then what we see that in the global dialogue, what the common issues which are coming up, incidentally, is the youth policies and projects, then the education. Some parties propose that we should have a mandatory military training for the young people. How many of you agree with that? Please raise your hand. That only the men are raising hands? Oh, one of the ladies are there. Oh, good, good. Why? Those who are against mandatory military training, please raise your hand. One of the, just give me a minute. Why you're against it? Yes, yes. Yes, yes, 1 minute. Please tell me. You just don't want to?
He doesn't want to be forced into doing this.
You are forced to go to school? You are forced to eat your food when you are young? Okay. No, so that was one of the issues. Then the reforms of the quotas, employment, entrepreneurship, ICT, agriculture, entertainment, and drug addiction. These were the major common issues which were there in the political manifestos in the recent past. So let me conclude by going to that. How does this going to take us into relating these problems and the vision which has been provided to us? How do you link the youth with these one? So here are the 5 roles which we have been talking about. The first and foremost is that you have to be a critical thinker. Without a critical perspective, I also become, as a researcher by nature, we become skeptic. And so, or you have a dissent. To learn how to be dissenting is part of the youth. So the critical thinking is a major role which we hope that you and us, we are going to play that role. Second, of course, the change maker. Bringing about change, I don't have to talk about this. The colleagues who are sitting on the dais are really epitomizes those change-making attitude and attributes. And then the innovations. What is very important is communication. That ability to communicate across ages, that is, nowadays communication breaks down within the family, across the society, and amongst countries. Communication is very important, and I see these houses full of the communicators. And last but not the least is to be the leader. The leader by setting the, leadership through examples, which we hope which will come through. So these roles, of the 5 roles, critical thinker, change makers, innovators, communicators, and leaders, my question to you, to this house is, if I have to put them in an order, rank them, which one will be number 1?
So maybe we can use the slider for that as well. So we can do a quick poll.
You have
we
an
can
app
find
which can do that?
Yes, yeah, we can do that. So we can give them a few minutes, and then we can have the
and let me conclude, and we can come back over there.
So what is the
So
number
I want
one?
to just say, in conclude that youth issues nowadays has become an inseparable part of any global discourse. You know how the things have moved? I have been around for quite some time. I'm 92 years old. And as you know, at this age, I have seen quite a lot. These guys really believe that? Okay, so I have seen the emergence of the discourse gender debate. I have seen the emergence of the environment debate. I can tell you, going around all over the world, that gender debate, environment debate, all these are there. But the new debate, the new issue is youth. And this is, the world is waking up to it. And I'm so happy that I'm meeting some of you over here today morning. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Debapriya. I think you have put in the framework here very eloquently and with a lot of these numbers and stuff. But I want to now come to Sohara. So there's obviously, as Debapriya mentioned, that there's a lot of conversation, a lot of debate, and you are representing a lot of young people across the global sphere. But you're also a journalist who are talking to a lot of people. What do you see? What is the, beyond the hype and the dialogue, are there real stuff happening?
Thank you, Asif bhai, for the question. It's great to be here at Frugal Innovation Forum. So yes, I wear a bunch of different hats. One of them is being a freelance journalist. And over the course of my work as an investigative journalist, I've been to many different parts of the country. Some parts that perhaps are not really a big integral part of our development discourse yet. For example, the Chittagong Hill Tracts region. To give one example, I was at SAJIC recently when they were going through a big food insecurity issue, a big food crisis. And a lot of the areas, such as Thanchi, in the very remote parts of the hill tracts, actually don't have even the roads or the infrastructure for emergency food to reach the people there. And the food insecurity situation is getting worse given the given climate change and the climatic impacts, which is actually completely changing weather patterns. So for example, the jhum cultivation that people used to do in those areas, they can no longer do that because the rainfall is no longer happening at the time it used to. And so in problems like these, there's a big role that as a journalist I can play, and there's a big role that needs to be played in terms of highlighting how a global phenomenon, such as climate change, is affecting people on the ground, particularly the youth. At this point, I'd just like to say that Klaus Schwab of World Economic Forum, he says that this generation is the last one that can perhaps put an end to climate change. And we are the generation, that has inherited climate change as the problem of our time. It perhaps, I wouldn't shy away from saying it is the biggest problem we face right now. And while a lot is being done in development, and while a lot of talk is going on about, yes, given that this generation is going to bear the brunt of climatic impacts, there isn't much that is being done in terms of putting youth on the forefront of the decision-making table to actually take decisions and shape policy about this global phenomenon that will change their future and their present as well. So far, what we are seeing in development interventions as well as in policy level is youth have a very tokenized presence. You have been to conferences such as the International Climate Conference, COP, at the UN General Assembly. It's the same scene everywhere. Youth are put on panels. Youth are maybe given the spotlight for 5 minutes to talk about their intervention. But in terms of really putting them in the decision-making seats, that is not happening as much yet. As Dr. Musa rightly said, the engagement has to be meaningful. And we have to create those spaces for them to really take the charge of the wheel, of the steering wheel, to address problems such as climate change, which is SDG 13, climate action, and make meaningful contribution there. And that's where I think my work comes in as a journalist, as a climate activist, as a development professional. But I think there's a lot more that can be done.
Thank you. I mean, do we have the results of the poll for what people think as the most pressing issue for young people? Maybe we can have that on the screen. Important issue, perhaps. And also, secondly, the other question that Debapriya said, that what, the 5 skills required, which one is the most important? Okay, so we are seeing, is that the Twitter feed? I was looking at the Slido poll results. Yeah? No, not available. Okay, all right. So going forward, thank you. So I think you framed it really well. I think meaningful engagement is something we're talking about. I'm going to come to Labib. I mean, he's already involved in a lot of these initiatives. And thank you, Labib. You're just coming from Barcelona, from a tech conference, and thank you for making it. And you look a bit jet-lagged as well. So I want to basically ask you, from your perspective, in terms of how can we ensure this meaningful engagement? I think you play a role in bringing in more technology. Is technology the answer? What are the risks and all the opportunities you're seeing bringing more into technology in this space based on the work that you do?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you all for being such an amazing audience, and thank you for bringing me here. So with regards to your first question about like what are the sorts of action or required, or like how much we can actually contribute meaningfully, I think in a lot of ways the system is so entrenched that it is very hard for youth, especially given that they're systematically made so invisible, to actually intervene and like break down the barriers of development and break down the barriers that cripple us from actually having a voice, as Sohara rightly mentioned. A lot of people talk about why activism is important, and a lot of people think that like the youth should just study and go on with their works and should just vote for change. But what if there is no political will? What if there is no social and political emergence to actually take a meaningful and a purposeful attempt to solve the challenges that we face together? We all talk about problems, but we do not give the people who are actually facing them, or people who are the most experienced ones, to have a platform to shape and to reshape the dialogue over and over again. I think we need a evaluation of problem and solution as we go and in that journey. We need to learn in each step of the process, as Dr. Musa rightly mentioned, and the problems that we are facing, the challenges with regards to the youth, is like, in a way, it's a very wicked problem that requires input from all strata of the society. And if you really want the participation and a meaningful contribution from all levels, especially in the youth, from the youth, then we need to make sure that we have all of these indicators assessing whether or not our policies are working, and we actually make an attempt to make inclusive policies. We budget according to bridging the gaps that are preventing us from developing further. And with regards to your second question about how technology is actually going to play a role, or how that role is going to be played, I think it is very important for us to acknowledge that today's world, everything can be done so fast, so much faster, so much easier, given that you expose people to the powers of technology. If I share my own experience, I am a disability rights activist, and I have founded an organization, InclusionX. And one of the things that we were facing like 3 years ago when I founded it was we had no infrastructure to actually give any sort of vocational training to our schools with people with disabilities. So I thought, if infrastructure is a problem, if funding is a problem, then we don't need to take on these challenges. We can simply rely on the powers of mobile phones and rely on the powers of personal computing devices that all of us unanimously have, and give training on like computer science, give training on technology to the students with disabilities that we have. So like acknowledging that we are in a developing stage, and we will not have the adequate funds and the support required to have the progress that countries like Norway does. And after acknowledging that, we need to make sure that we do everything in our capacity to bring in technology into shaping these dialogues and into making innovative solutions. And I think that can be used as a source of good and a source to inspire the present and the future generations to come.
Thank you. I mean, I think what you're saying is, in effect, moving from, going back to what Sohara was saying, moving from tokenism to moving to beyond meaningful engagement. I think technology definitely can play a role. You have shown the way, in a sense, in a specific issue where you feel very strongly about, you have taken a leadership. I want to come to Sebastian as well, that you are working also in a similar issue around energy. In cases like this, where we are not really looking at young people as just employable, we are looking at them as change makers, as part of the solution that's going to come. What is the ecosystem quite there to support them, to support people like Labib, to support people like you in Bangladesh, based on your Bangladesh experience, and probably, if any other parts you have some experience as well to share?
First, I'm very happy to learn that in Bangladesh I'm both young and old. So I fall in two categories. So now you can guess my age a bit. I want to approach the question a little bit, first of all, from a startup perspective, and also being a faculty at North-South. Maybe start with the latter one. I see a lot of hope, because in the last 5 years, as a professor, you have these consultation hours. And in the beginning, when you ask at the beginning of the semester, what do you want to become? It's usually, you make these nice pie charts, and probably 60% want to become a banker. Because that's marriage material, right? So over the past couple of years, this has changed. And more people coming into the consultation hour, because they have heard, I'm not only at NSU, I'm also an entrepreneur. I also want to become an entrepreneur. What do I need to do? So there is a new appetite, and more people coming with ideas and want to start something. I think that's a very good sign. And that has been, at least in my short 5-year experience here, has been a recent phenomenon. Now, to come to your question, how good is the ecosystem for that? If we look internationally, the big corporates are hunting startups. They're hunting them down. And at SOLshare, we often make the experience, if we go abroad to international conferences, there's a lot of hype. The big corporates are coming, trying to make projects with you, and so forth. If I look at Bangladesh, the big corporates don't hunt you. They rather have you still on the ignore list entirely. And if we look at access to finance through that, and that comes usually in link with that, the problem becomes very apparent that the big companies are often family companies, and they own a hospital, and then they own that, and that, and that. And that's an entrepreneurship when you come in with a lot of capital, and then you start a new thing. So that makes it extremely difficult for young people with an idea to actually get going, because the access to capital is extremely difficult. And banks fail all over the world in this regard to a large extent. So usually the big corporates come in, or the family business, and so forth. But I see that there is quite a lack to that. And that's, let's say, the urban scenario. In the rural scenario, obviously access to capital and finance is even more severe. Even so, there, I suppose, with strong microfinance sector, that the situation may be even better for a rural entrepreneur. And speaking there from the experience at SOLshare, the question is, and that was shown on the slide, is access to opportunity. Sorry? Okay. Yeah. Access to opportunity. And then from this change makerism, this idea, so how can I have everyone a change maker? And that means access to opportunities, that means access to electricity, and you said it in your initial slides, that 43% of the rural youth, their prime concern is the electricity crisis. And that comes also with electricity, comes also access to mobile phones, access to internet, and these are all, as Labib says, these are extremely important tools in order to be able to get information, being able to compute these things, and get onto that. And that is something we have dedicated our journey towards, to empower people. And often the young people in the village are the ones who go to college, which means they are the new educated class in the village, and that means they are the pioneers. So when we come with innovative solutions to villages, it's the young people who pick it up first and who become our ambassadors. So for us, the role is definitely key, but I think a lot needs to change in this mindset, be it here in Dhaka or be it in the rural areas, that what is a startup, what is an entrepreneur, and how much they can be a change maker, and how serious can we take them.
I want to come to Debapriya for a quick minute before I go to the audience for a few questions, which is like, as a 92-year-old, do you want to challenge this? And at the same time, going back to all this hype and dialogue, why isn't real stuff happening?
Colleagues, when I say all these things, you must understand that I am on the right side of this age over here in the panel. But yet, let me be a bit more provocative and come along. So this, I go on hearing this issue, that's tokenism and participation, but not meaningful enough, and et cetera, et cetera. Voice is not adequately effective. You see, you look at around the world, the average age of the prime ministers are decreasing. The average age is decreasing across the world, particularly in continental Europe, and obviously also in North America up to a point. So this, and if you look at the legislators, I do not have the ready figure, it is also the average age is falling, notwithstanding the growing longevity. So in terms of the domain of politics, it is really happening in some kind of youthfulness is coming in. Now, if you look at this, I'm taking on my colleagues over here. Look at the issues which we see over and the innovation and the initiatives which take. Yes, they are all very noble initiatives, from climate change to helping people who are differently able. All these things and fine. But at the end of the day, when you will come to this, you will find that the governance is the major issue beyond which you will not be able to solve these problems. There will be systemic concerns. There will be the law, the rule of law issue. There will be the issue of corruption, and there will be many others violation of rights, which is out there. Now look at how many young people really fight for the rights issues and really wants to be organized based on that particular issue, which essentially means going out from the partial fragmented intervention to taking a systemic view. Take the three examples of the initiative, the movement which we had in Bangladesh recently. The VAT on education, the road safety, and the quota reform. All are partial. None of them essentially touch the global or the social, the national social vision or political concerns over there. So there is a serious depoliticization of the youth, alienation from the politics, but at the same time, they want to make fundamental changes in this country. This is what you call in Bengali, Shonar Pathor Pati. So how do you translate that in English? It's an impossible task. You know, it's an oxymoron that you want to change, make all these things happen, and you want to be in your safe place, sitting at the midnight on your keyboards and in writing notes on your Facebook, making your opinion known, and not making that voice heard on the street without an organization which wants to change the system. I don't think this is going to work over there. So you will have to really come out and be up there and really take it up squarely over there. So that's my only point to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sohara, Labib, do you want to respond to that? I mean, are young people thinking that they don't want to get involved in politics, but they still want to make fundamental changes? Is it possible?
Yeah, definitely. I think some very good points were made. I think first I'd respond to the first statistics, which is statistics from my end. If you talk about representation, yes, maybe politically it's increasing, but of all parliamentarians globally, less than 2% are in their 20s. And I think we're seeing more young people enter, but the rate of that change is nothing compared to what we need to see right now, given the pace at which issues are emerging. In terms of youth engaging meaningfully, I completely agree. I think we are a very desensitized generation. We see the horrors of the world as we scroll through our news feed. Fire in Puran Dhaka, click, sad react, people died in Syria, angry react, that sort of thing, and we feel like our work is done, and which is why I think it's very important to get your hands dirty And that's what I've been doing, at least in my small capacity. So with the two youth organizations that I lead, one is with Global Shapers Community, which is a global network of young people. So what we do is we try to identify problems in our city, and it's a group of people who come from very different backgrounds. We try to put our skill sets together and decide what's the small intervention we can take to make a mark in our capacity to address that problem. So for example, we have many projects that we are running right now. One of the problems we identified was that as Dhaka as a city lacks greenery. A lot of trees are being cut down to get your hands dirty. And that's what I've been doing, at least in my small capacity. So with the two youth organizations that I lead, one is with Global Shapers Community, which is a global network of young people. So what we do is we try to identify problems in our city, and it's a group of people who come from very different backgrounds. We try to put our skill sets together and decide what's the small intervention we can take to make a mark in our capacity to address that problem. So for example, we have many projects that we are running right now. One of the problems we identified was that as Dhaka as a city lacks greenery. A lot of trees are being cut down especially with the new wave of constructions that we are seeing with metro rail, etc. So we thought that how can we address this problem? One easy way to do it, and one scalable, I guess, initiative that a lot of people can replicate, not just here, but regionally, is if you plant trees. By planting trees, not necessarily on the roads, but it can be anywhere. It can be on your rooftops, it can be on a small corner of your house, it can be anywhere. And we started very small. We started with schools, where we'd go and we'd talk to kids and try to, first of all, inform them about, because a lot of kids these days don't even recognize trees. If you point at one, they wouldn't be able to tell you what tree it is. But in our parents' generation, most people would climb trees as an activity, and they knew everything by heart, right? So we start from there. First of all, sensitize them to why greenery is important, make them attached, and then we would show up with actually trees on truck, do animations, do role plays, and donate trees to kids to take care of and become a guardian of that one plant. So the idea is, of that small initiative we had initially, was to instill in young people a value, a sort of a liking and an attachment for greenery, so that they grow up as guardians of the planet. And this initiative that we started in Dhaka, actually, because it was so scalable, it got replicated in 4 countries around South Asia through the Global Shapers Network. So actually in Afghanistan, in India, in Pakistan, in Nepal, and recently even in Sri Lanka, this same initiative, which we call Trillionaire, you can search online, you can find it, it's being replicated. And hundreds of thousands of trees are being planted in those cities like Kabul, cities like Peshawar, for instance. And we're seeing cities green around the world. So the good thing, the reason I brought up the example is we need to find ways for youth to engage that doesn't take a lot of perhaps maybe their time or initiative, because that can act as a way to maybe disencourage them, and they'd feel like I don't have that amount of time, or that amount of, there is no reason for me to put in that much effort. So find something small which will encourage them to get their hands dirty. Once they start doing, once they see the impact of their work and how even a small thing can make a difference, and how they may be part of a global movement, as what we're seeing with our project Trillionaire, that can actually encourage them to do more. So it has to start somewhere, it has to start small. Perhaps maybe expecting a political upheaval at first Groh from people who are armchair activists is not going to work. But you can first get them out there, get them to do something, some initiative of social action, and then from there you can actually cultivate that mindset where they care about social issues that go beyond their own immediate interest.
Thank you. Can we have the questions back up again? I think there was one question that came up. I just want to, that came from the floor. I want to go and ask Labib that, and also Dr. Debapriya, Bhattacharya, which is, can we have the questions? Yeah, I think the question was around from Saeed Ahmed. How to overcome the current tokenism in youth involvement in policy making in a country where from constitution to institutions like BRAC were once built by young people in the 70s. We don't see that anymore. And that's where things need to change. I mean, you want to address that, Dr. Bhattacharya, and then Labib, perhaps you can.
I think there are things happening and the young people are doing it. So it's not that true that you don't see the young people anymore. my colleagues who are sitting on my right side, they're on the right side. On that, they have been talking about that, so it's there. Why did they pick on BRAC? Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, they don't think that you are young enough? No, you didn't bring back. So, you know, with the overwhelming enthusiasm with youthfulness, don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. I think there is a need for a balance over there, both in terms of experience and expertise, as you have said, and also the maturity and everything else is very much also an issue over there. Networks also comes with age. It's also a function of knowing more people and over there. But at the same time, whether one makes space for that. I see what, I work for in an organization where my Center for Policy Dialogue, the majority are women. They are essentially better researchers, it turns out to be. And essentially, they are all average age will be less than 40 in certain ways, the young people, researchers coming in. So I wouldn't think that this is a very justified statement putting into the organization. It's by demography, you cannot do it nowadays in that way.
But I mean, do you feel that young people are involved in policy making? Or is there a way to engage them? Are they even interested in getting involved in policy making?
Yes, I very much agree with Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya in terms of actually formulating policies. Of course, there needs to be a balance between a lot of factors, not limited to just experience. But I also think that in terms of like innovating new policies that target the dynamic problem, the ever-changing problems that are happening in the world, we need to realize that, like, if we think of, say, design thinking as a tool for innovation, then like policy is something which requires innovation as well. And a lot of people do not actually understand the necessity of instilling these new good practices. Like, for example, the good practices in terms of innovation with regards to creative thinking is inspiring, is like empathizing people. A lot of people, maybe they work for different groups, they work for different disenfranchised communities, but they are doing so by being sympathized, by like having a sense of sympathy. But like sympathy comes from a position of privilege and from a position of power, but empathy is actually realizing that you and the other person who is in that other spot, like I'm here, but someone else on my at my age is selling tea at like after like a few yards away from BRAC. This empathy is something that the youth have actually systematically been in charge of instilling in the policy. We have seen the current youth movements are strong examples of how the youth are no longer as desensitized as they were 10 or 15 years ago. They are bringing up change. They are bringing up positions for which there is no political or social will. And I think if we don't totally shift the blame of the governance problems to the youth, but rather recognize them as an important actor and also do our parts as adults to make room for them to make those policies. I mean, I need so much bureaucracy to be able to do a lot of the work that I do, but if the politicians, if the system doesn't allow me to actually contribute and do my part, then there is actually not a lot that we can do. It has to be a system that needs to be approached from all the parties, and of course the youth can play a role, as has been evidenced by the current and the past experiences and of movements we've seen. And I think if all the parts and all the demographics of age and race, they work in tandem, then I think real progress in terms of even governance can be achieved.
Thank you. I think we have to wrap up the panel, so I want to just get some concluding thoughts. So Sebastian wanted to say something on this, and then I'll come to Dr. Bhattacharya.
Slightly opposed to your remark. So, I mean, the climate change issue becomes almost a battle between generations. Because the youth are affected, the old have have caused it. So when you say the youth are incentivized, few things. I mean, I want to prevent things from happening usually. So as long as we stick to the paradigm of, okay, we don't do enough for climate change, things will continue to cook and cook and cook. And you can call it unsensitized, but I think rather it's cooking and boiling and boiling. And if we look at Europe right now, the school strike for the climate, which Greta Thunberg has initiated, which is now spreading like fire, where on Thursdays and Fridays hardly any students go to school anymore. I think there's a lot happening, and it's becoming more and more and more. The question is, can we afford to keep it boiling? Because at some point, the people who are most affected by climate change, which is among them Bangladesh here in the Delta, people will no longer put up with it, and it's a conflict and all the terrorism, all what we talked about, that will come more and more and more. So I think it's also a huge responsibility, and I would also put it then the other way around. I don't think it's an oxymoron necessarily. I think it would be a wise prevention, and I think voices are being uttered, and voices have been tried to be uttered. You spoke about the protests we had last year. The way they have been ended, I don't take it on NSU campus including. I don't take it wrong that, of course, people become more cautious and hold back a bit, but just a few cents on that.
Colleagues, I thought the debate is just beginning. My point is very simple. You see, we need to distinguish between two terms: volunteers and change makers. Volunteers are not necessarily change makers, but change makers can be volunteers. Volunteers essentially goes along with the existing paradigm and tries to make space in order to alleviate situation a bit. But change makers wants to make fundamental, I hope fundamental changes in the system. So why that is the change maker role is different from volunteers is particularly when you come to, I like the word scaling up. So the moment you want to scale up, you will hit the system. If there is no accountability in the system, if there is no transparency in the system, if the basic rights are not really respected in the system, you will not have your space scaled up anywhere. All those, the good saplings which have been planted, and your climate change, whatever boiling has happening, all these will really vanish away. So my point to you, colleagues, today morning had been, I have come here not to discuss SDGs. I have come to discuss here the stupid development goals we pursue in a certain way, thinking that if we keep a bit more cleaner around me and a bit good on that, my conscience will be clean, but not necessarily we will achieve the fundamental role. So what I really look forward to, that a much more scaled up voice in that way, much more scaled up organization in that way, much more scaled up linkages with the major concerns of this country and the world, which includes climate change. And only then, possibly, if we come out of our safe space, out of our comfort zone, only then possibly the frugal can become robust. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say today morning.
Thank you, Debapriya. I think you summed it up very well. And there has been a number of questions. We won't be able to get to some of those, but all these questions will be answered in the upcoming panels. We are talking about old-fashioned community mobilization. We are talking about how depoliticization is affecting the youth as well. So we'll keep the conversation going, but again, as I would say that, I would echo with Dr. Bhattacharya, who said that you need to have change makers, and you were looking at the young people as bringing in this change, and they not necessarily have to wait for the older generation to give them space. They will make this space as it's happening in different parts of politics. It's happening in entrepreneurship. Zuckerberg did not wait for Facebook to start because he will be old enough to start Facebook. He just made it happen and sold his vision. So that's what we need. And how do we kind of create the supporting, nurturing environment for younger people to flourish and become change makers in the coming days is something that we want to talk about and look at what are potential models. So I'm going to end the panel with thanking the panelists profusely, and has been a very interesting sessions in terms of various insights and perspective. Thank you. All of you, big round of applause.